Okay, welcome everyone to our next webinar, Decision Making for Major Infrastructure During a Pandemic, the Response of the Planning Inspectorate in England. Today we are joined by Martin Broderick, Visiting Professor at Oxford Brookes University's Impact Assessment Unit. He is also currently an Examining Inspector at the National Infrastructure Directorate of the Planning Inspectorate, where he is involved in strategic decision making in relation to nationally significant infrastructure projects. He has worked extensively with industrial partners on infrastructure and its environmental and social performance. Today, Martin will set out how the planning process for a nationally significant infrastructure project in England responded to COVID-19 and how it pivoted the technology of public participation to ensure the public and wider stakeholders could contribute to decision making. This is the first in a series of new evening webinars, which will explore how professionals working in environmental impact assessment have adapted their ways of working in response to the pandemic. If you would like to get involved in this series, please do get in touch. As always, there will be a chance for questions at the end of the presentations, so please do submit these in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. You can do this at any point during the presentation. I will then ask these on your behalf later on. Thank you very much for logging in, and Martin, I'll now hand over to you.
Thanks a lot, Italy. Thanks for that introduction. Good evening, everyone. Good to be speaking here today. My name is Martin Broderick, as Italy pointed out, and I'm a PINS NSIP Examining Inspector. I'm speaking here today in a personal capacity. And I'm going to be speaking about how PINS responded to and pivoted its examinations of NSIPs during the COVID pandemic. Many of these projects are the biggest bits of infrastructure in the UK. I'm also visiting professor at Oxford Brookes University's Impact Assessment Centre unit, and I've worked in greater than 25 different countries internationally on EIA of infrastructure and all sectors. I'll speak for about 20 minutes, and I will have 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end of my talk. This presentation will set out the response of the UK's government agency PINS, which is responsible for planning processes for nationally significant infrastructure projects in England and its response to COVID-19. And it'll discuss how it pivoted its technology of public participation to ensure the public and wider stakeholders could continue to contribute to decision-making during the course of the emergency. And I believe it proffers a good example of an adaptive, reflective, and co-production participatory process. The NSIPs I've examined as an examining inspector, I've done these 6 here. Manston Airport being the last one I did last year, DCO application, and I've done 3 acceptances for NSIP projects as well. I've also worked as a freelance consultant via Oxford Brookes University on another 7 NSIPs, Silvertown Tunnel being 1, Paramount, Tilbury 2 Port, etc. So I've got a reasonable background in the NSIP process. Oxford Brookes University Impact Assessment Unit is a centre of excellence for environmental impact assessment, and we do collaborative and interdisciplinary work, impact appraisal theory and practice, conduct research, undertake consultancy, including the reviewing of environmental statements, and we do professional development training. And our major feature is that basically we are a trusted independent third party for the review and for training purposes in the EIAs, in the impact assessment world. Recent work we've been involved in, we've advised the Lebanese government on the development of environmental and social impact assessment guidelines for wind farms. We include some ESIA training for natural resources Wales. We've been leading a study on the strategic sustainability effects of the construction of Hinkley Point C. We've been working for a number of local authorities around the country, and I've also worked in the Port of Tilbury in London on cumulative effects assessment issues associated with their DCO application. NSIPs require development consent under the procedures governed by the Planning Act 2008, and PINS examines these applications made by the developer or proponent. And the application process consists of 6 stages, but fundamental to what we do is the Aarhus Convention, which the British Parliament signed up to in 2005. The convention establishes several public rights: access to environmental information, public participation in environmental decision making, and access to justice, the right to review procedures and to challenge public decisions. Now, the Aarhus Convention will not disappear post-Brexit. It's a separate convention outside of the European treaties. In recent years, there's been a push for more public participation in the impact assessment process, but some countries have used the COVID-19 crisis to actually remove some aspects of public participation. Example is India, which actually removed a lot of the impact assessment consultation processes. And there's concerns about the implications for future infrastructure consulting projects. PINS believed, as an executive agency of the government, that processes can be adapted rather than be removed. That's very important. So here's the 6 stages in the application process. Pre-application, you do an acceptance, you do a pre-examination period, then there's a 6-month examination period, 3 months to make a decision, and 3 months to the post-decision for legal challenge. So it's a well-defined process in the Planning Act 2008. And the influence that people can have on the process is indicated by this curve here. And basically, a lot of influence pre-application, during the acceptance, and during the pre-examination and examination period. And we're going to examine the pre-examination and examination period today for live projects that were going on earlier on this year. The whole process for examining NSIPs is inquisitorial as opposed to adversarial, with ways of working designed essentially for paper-based activities and face-to-face meetings. Face-to-face meetings are a fundamental part of the examination process. The public health emergency affected the efficacy of all these elements that PINS was planning. But the UK government recognised the importance of continuing to progress the consideration and the determination of infrastructure during the lockdown. And digital events do present opportunities for planning processes to be involving local communities and to minimise the impacts of delays to planning decisions that might otherwise occur due to the requirements for social distancing. So PINS therefore pivoted the examination process, explored ways of allowing virtual hearings for proceed in an open, fair and impartial manner, which didn't disadvantage anyone in the process and also protected public health at the same time as well. They published guidance on the 12th of March 2020, and this is updated on the 28th of May 2020 to include NSIPs, although this update only applied to England and not to Wales. In July, the government issued further guidance on a temporary change in legislation regarding suspension of the requirements of physical deposit. It is still required to be publicly accessible on the PINS websites for all the documentation associated in the application. This pivot worked in practice between the lockdown in March and mid-July 2020. And we're going to examine the 3-month pre-examination stage and the 6-month examination stage, stage 4. And we consider how PINS approach 2 specific elements: the holding of virtual hearings and the need to legally comply with legal requirements to notify public and other stakeholders of the examination and to make available for inspection all examination documents. Methodology we use, we reviewed the PINS web portal to identify projects which were in the 2 stages we're looking at, stage 3 and 4. Identified when and how projects have progressed during early lockdown. Identified what actions were taken to hold virtual meetings. A brief review of comments were available in public sources on the effectiveness or otherwise of the virtual process. And we end with a review of the evolving process and identification of successes and challenges on holding virtual hearings. The findings represent the PIN system at the time of writing, which was mid-July 2020, earlier on this year. Other projects that have been added to the process, but they're not included here. So this pivot is only looking at a snapshot of the adaptive processes implemented during the pivot. Projects in stage 4 we looked at: examination. And as of 17th of July, there were 5 projects in examination, 3 national network road schemes, 2 renewable energy schemes, Norfolk Boreas offshore wind farm, and Kemsley waste and energy. The first road scheme we looked at was the A38 Derby Junctions, and the timetable for the examination was revised on the 3rd of April 2020. And they continued the co-production practice principles on the 21st of April, and the examining authority asked all the interested parties, IPs, for their views on which specific hearings should go ahead, if they were to go ahead. Interested parties also asked to submit their responses to a questionnaire on topics that were raised by the examining authority. And PINS sought to adopt reflective practices to ensure that any changes were inclusive, supportive, and the questions were asked of how PINS could help increase confidence. These 7 questions here. So it was adaptive and reflective, the process that PINS pivoted around to actually continue with virtual hearings. On the 12th of May 2020, the deadline for completion of the examination was extended to 8th of September, although the examination was actually completed 2 months early on the 8th of July 2020. The first virtual hearings took place on the 9th of June 2020 and addressed all these issues here: compulsory acquisition, transport networks and traffic, biodiversity, etc. And in participants involved in the hearings included the applicant, local government authorities, business groups, community groups, and the hospital trust. And the feedback overwhelmingly was generally acknowledged by all parties that the virtual hearing format was effective. And there was an audio recording made of the hearings, which was published on the PINS website, portal site. The next project that was in examination was the M25 Junction 10. And the hearings were originally scheduled for March 2020, just as the country went into lockdown. The examining authority postponed the hearings, and they sent out a questionnaire asking people what they should do and what they would prefer to do in terms of addressing issues in the examination. And on the 5th of May 2020, the examining authority announced a 2-month time extension to the M25 to 10. And they revised the questionnaire that was used on the A38, the previous project I talked about. And a key legal requirement is for a notice of the application to be published widely. The examining authority waived this requirement, but asked that additional newspaper notices be put in place to ensure that no one was disadvantaged, no one was not aware of the examination. And as with the A38, the feedback was very good on the virtual hearing process, and was generally acknowledged by all parties that the virtual hearings format was effective. The A1 in Berkeley, the third road scheme, the title was varied to accompany the virtual hearings, but this is a very uncontroversial examination. And the examining authority wrote to all interested parties on the 11th of June 2020 on how they would like to take part in the virtual hearings. And all hearings reported have proceeded without any technical difficulties, and the verbal feedback of participants was positive. Again, continuing with reflective practices, the examining authority stated they plan to issue a request for feedback on the virtual hearings to all interested parties for the closing examination. Norfolk Boreas offshore wind farm, which also examination, and its first open floor hearing took place last year in 2019. However, subsequent hearings were cancelled, and the examining authority wrote to all interested parties and to basically get their views on how they should proceed. And they wrote to the Secretary of State on the 6th of April to extend the examination period to the 12th of October 2020. On the 19th of May, the examining authority issued a letter updating the examination timetable for the offshore wind farm. As with other projects, the letter contained the PINS questionnaire asking IPs to provide information on their access to video conferencing facilities, telephone facilities, and confidence in their use. And the first virtual open floor hearing took place on the 2nd of July 2020 and was attended by 6 interested parties. And the second set of virtual hearings were held on 21st to 24th of July. And the final project that was an examination was the Kemsley Energy from Waste plant. And on the examining authority made a procedural decision to postpone the hearing scheduled for the week commencing the 13th of April. The responses from IPs and non-standard questionnaire on access to video conferencing facilities was also factored into the examination. And taking all circumstances into account, the examining authority agreed it was a relatively uncomplicated, uncontroversial examination and could proceed without hearings. Now, the projects in stage 3 for pre-examination, there were 9 projects. They divided stage 3, 3 renewable energy plants, 2 national networks, 1 national network rail, 1 electricity network, 1 fossil fuel plant, and 1 nuclear energy plant. 6 of the 9 applications in this stage had issued their Section 56 notices, which provide notification of the project to the public and stakeholders and gives them a timetable to submit their relevant representations. At the time of writing, 3 projects had not yet posted their Section 56 notices. The following therefore only considers 6 projects where notices have been issued and consideration has been taken by PINS on whether to pivot virtual hearings. The examining authority for East Anglia 1 and 2, they were merged together, these 2 separate applications, and then 1 examining authority decided to postpone the preliminary meeting and first round of hearings in March 2020. And basically, they again used the questionnaire to actually inquire from interested parties, as affected parties, what way they should adapt the process to be inclusive and deliberative as possible. Now that was done for the 2 offshore wind farms. South Humber Bank Energy Centre, the application was accepted for examination the 4th of May. And on 12th of May, the applicant notified the PINS that the government's lockdown stay at home requirements had evolved with some lifting restrictions. And basically, there were problems in the print media, but they asked for more newspaper notices to be put in the press as required by legislation. And basically, the local community was well served by these notices, and they were well sort of informed about the nature of the progress on these examinations. The M54 to M6 link road struggle with similar issues in terms of notification of people with Section 56 notices, and the deposit locations of documents were their unavailability was publicised in the London Gazette and local newspapers as well. And basically, PINS confirmed on the 2nd of June that the applicant had conformed to the requirements of notifying everyone about where they could see documents and where the examination was going to take place and what the relevant representation period was. The final two projects in the pre-examination stage or very early phases. The aqueduct interconnector letter postponed the first date for the preliminary meeting. On the 3rd of July 2020, a new date was set for the virtual PM be held on the 18th of August. And at the time of writing, the examining authority report its head branch line considered whether or how a virtual event should proceed. And again, the questionnaires were issued to all interested parties and affected parties to say how they believe the examination will proceed remotely and virtually. So PINS began notifying interested parties and affected parties in late March 2020 about what they're planning to do. As in early July 2020, PINS couldn't hold events, public events as done prior to the COVID emergency. And PINS conducted the first digital hearing on the 11th of May 2020, and it's quickly scaled up in relation to further virtual events during May and June 2020, where this is consistent with fair participation. And the pivot process has provided opportunities for interested parties, affected parties with an internet-connected digital device to access and speak at hearings using the video link provided by PINS. People who did not have an internet connection or did not feel confident in using technology, but who had a telephone with a keypad, were also able to dial in to the meeting and to hear and to be allowed to speak as well. The agendas for all meetings are published on the project websites at PINS. Interested parties who provided advance notice they wish to speak were allowed to speak and were given an invitation to join the hearings. As in the former pre-lockdown face-to-face hearings, the examining authority controls the virtual hearings and invites parties to speak in turn. Audio recordings were published on the websites and are available for all people who were involved. And it's demonstrating their commitment to reflective practice. The examining authorities have held practice sessions using the proposed technology, and these are recorded for training and quality assurance purposes. So people were allowed to practice beforehand how the hearings would proceed. I think IPs who experience problems could contact the case officer and then sort them out prior to the hearing beginning. Anyone who's unable to rejoin the hearing or join the hearing could always listen to the recordings that were published on the website. And if a hearing was disrupted by technical or other issues, the examining authority could adjourn and did adjourn in some cases. So in implementing the pivot, PINS has led in demonstrating the successful use of technology to continue their work. And they recognize that the use of technology to support virtual planning events, it may be challenging for many participants and have aimed to ensure that it enables fair participation. And feedback indicates that the pivot in technology and participation has been successful. So the public health emergency has generally made acknowledgement of the need to move to greater reliance on digital and technology for consultation and public engagement. In order to achieve some of the key objectives of participation successfully influence decision-making, they tested the robustness of information and engagement and participation of public decision-making is considered to be an ideal in many areas of planning. And I think what this has demonstrated is how a reflective co-production process contributes to public confidence decision-making. An inquisitorial process that we used in the Planning Act 2008 has also helped in levelling the usual inequality of arms between developers and the public. I think the decision-making process for major infrastructure can be overwhelming for some members of the public, even in non-COVID-19 times, and it might even become worse in the pivot to virtual systems if not undertaken comprehensively. And you've got to be conscious of not excluding any particularly hard-to-reach groups or people with less resources for potential access to resources to the internet. I think the reflective co-production participatory process adopted by PINS is aiming to resolve some of these issues. I think finally, I would say this is novel coronavirus we're dealing with here in terms of COVID-19, but it won't be the last coronavirus we'll have to defeat because of how we're treating the planet and how we're treating the biosphere. There will be more pandemics, and the world of impact assessment and planning and delivery of infrastructure internationally need to be better prepared for the consequences of novel pandemics of the pivot in the future. I think PENS has expeditiously and efficiently put measures in place to allow planning process principles to proceed while still maintaining fair access and legal compliance. And I think these measures can prove useful templates for decision makers internationally. Any questions?
Great, thank you very much, Martin. That was really interesting and great to hear that there's been a lot of thought put into how to be inclusive in the process, because I think that's always been one worry of these kind of the digital side of things, is how to make sure everyone's included. So yes, please do, everyone who's interested, please put a question in the Q&A function and I'll read these out on your behalf. From my point of view, Martin, I was just interested to know, do you think these virtual hearings then are going to stay? And do you think that they actually increase the number of people who engage with these processes?
I think it has increased the number of people, and I think they will stay in some hybrid form or other. But we need to be very conscious that we don't disadvantage anyone in terms of deploying this digital technology for hearings and virtual events. But I think it will be a hybrid system that will come in place once the COVID-19 pandemic is sorted out. But I think face-to-face meetings have a particularly good value, a good place to actually, good place in the system of examining nationally significant infrastructure projects.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. So we've got a question from one of the attendees who's asked that they're interested in the feedback from the users. How have they found it, both applicants and objectors?
The feedback has been delivered directly to PENS in either writing or representations, and the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. They said that they worked very efficiently and very expeditiously the hearings, and no one has indicated that they felt any disadvantage from the process of virtual hearings. We'll be always be conscious that there are some hard to reach groups who may not be as confident in giving feedback. So we should be always alert to not disadvantaging anyone in the hearings process, virtual hearing process.
Great, thank you. Please do anyone else put questions in the Q&A function. I was also, do you think this is going to be an important step in the adoption of digital EIA, the fact that the planning inspectorate is using these types of engagement?
And undoubtedly, digital EIA has been progressed, has been super speed during this COVID pandemic. I think we've gone in the last 9 months, we've achieved, I think maybe 5-6 years worth of advancement purely because of the pandemic and the adoption of digital technology. And I think everyone should embrace digitalization of EIA. It's the way things are going. It's the way examinations will be held in the future. And that's the way people are going to be engaging in the future through digital media. That's definitely going to happen.
Great, thank you. That's really interesting. One more question here. Does the virtual hearings format encourage a wider range of people to engage who may question the project on matters of principle, particularly with regard to climate change?
I think there has been feedback that says that there's been a wider range of people because the virtual hearings enables that for some people to get involved. On the question of climate change will be front and fore of the examinations of virtually every NSIP application. It was front and fore in the applications I've done recently, especially the Manston Airport one. And basically, it is an example of basically you can get wider involvement, you can get issues dealt with in more detail, and you can get more inputs and feedback from people involved in the process. So it does have benefits, the virtual process, but I think you need to be careful not to disadvantage anyone in the process who have lack of resources or lack of access to the internet and computing facilities.
Of interest, do you know if many people did join using purely their telephone? Because I expect that would be more inclusive that way.
Quite a few on the A38 Derby like that, because first of all, it's a rural area of the country like that, where the internet connection is not great. A lot of people did join by phone, dialing in on phone, and actually contributing to their hearings through the phone system.
That's interesting. Thank you. Do you think that post-pandemic we will revert fully to face-to-face consultation, or do you think there will be a lasting impact on the way consultations happen in the future?
I think face-to-face examination is important, but I mean, I think we need to be sort of wise to how technology is progressing. And if the technology can bring more people into the process, it should be adopted. If it's disadvantaging anyone in the process, we should be looked at again. But I think it has the potential to actually get more people involved in the whole process.
Great, thank you. That was, yeah, thank you, Martin. That was really, really interesting. There's no more questions at the moment, but I'll just go through some of the kind of some of the other bits, and anyone who has another question, please do add it into the box. So as I mentioned, this is the first in a new series where we're looking to discuss how EIA professionals have adapted to a new normal in the COVID-19. So please do get in touch if you'd like to be involved. This webinar has been recorded and will be available on the IES website and on our YouTube channel. If you're watching the recording on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel, like the video, and hit the bell to get notifications for when new videos are added to the channel. Our next event will be an IAQM webinar, which will be on the 16th of December, and this will be focused on driver behaviour changes and how telematics can inform the changing new normal in vehicle emissions in the UK. Again, this is free to attend, so please do visit the IES or IAQM website to register. It looks like that's all the questions for today. So once again, Martin, I'd really like to thank you for a really interesting presentation and a good discussion afterwards. Thank you everyone for logging in. I hope you found that beneficial and informative. And I hope to see you at the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Indy. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. Take care, bye.
Bye.